November 26, 2008, Mumbai. 10 illiterate men, armed with AK-47s, bags full of grenades, GPS coordinated on crumpled paper. They entered the city like soldiers and executed the worst terrorist attack in Indian history. They were trained in Pakistan, but they were guided by an American, David Headley, a US citizen working for US agencies. But you might already know this. But here's something that you probably don't. That the United States knew prior about the 26/11 attack. Indian intelligence warned the United States that something is going to happen on Indian soil and an American was involved. Headley's own wife warned them, but America chose to do nothing. They protected him. They protected their asset, and Indians died. And this wasn't the first time. The United States has a long, bloody history of funding, training, and protecting terrorists. Terrorists who went to kill Indians. The story starts in 1979. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The United States saw this as an opportunity, not to save Afghanistan, but to weaken the Cold War enemy. And for that, they needed a partner on the ground. And that partner was Pakistan. The United States didn't just give moral support. It launched Operation Cyclone, one of the longest and most expensive covert CIA operations ever run. Through this, the United States and Saudi Arabia pumped over $3.5 million to train and arm Mujahideen fighters to take on Soviet forces. But here's the problem. This money did not go directly to them. It went straight to Pakistan's ISI, their intelligence agency, which had its own agenda. The ISI used American funds to build training camps, arms, stockpiles, and militant networks, not just for Afghanistan, but for India. In fact, many fighters never even made it to Afghanistan. They were trained specifically to be deployed in Jammu and Kashmir. And the Americans, they knew this. Declassified CIA documents and testimonies before the US Congress now confirms this. But at that time, Washington looked the other way. Why? Because Pakistan was useful. And India, which had chosen a non-allied path during the Cold War, wasn't. This is where the roots of terrorism in India began. Not in the caves of Tora Bora, but in the American decision to fund a rogue intelligence agency with no oversight and no accountability. Militant groups like Hizbul Mujahideen, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and later Jaish-e-Mohammed all got their early lifeline from this era of American financing. They were armed, sheltered, and trained by Pakistan using American funds. So let's call it what it is. The United States did not accidentally support terrorism in India. It made a strategic decision to empower a country it knew was exporting jihad because it suited their temporary goals. And when that short-term game ended, the weapons, they didn't disappear. The fighters didn't vanish. They just changed directions. And India became the next target. In early 1990s, after the end of Cold War, Kashmir saw its darkest chapter. Tens of thousands of Kashmiri Pandits were driven out of their home by Islamist terrorists. Death threats were issued. Killings took place. Loudspeakers from mosques demanded non-Muslim to leave. And they did, in fear. Who were these terrorists? They weren't farmers with guns. They were trained militants from groups like Hizbul Mujahideen, armed and sheltered by Pakistan's ISI. And who built the ISI's terror infrastructure? The United States. Throughout the 1980s, during the Afghan War, the CIA had pulled billions to Pakistan, helping the ISI grow into a monster it became. And even after the Cold War ended, that funding did not stop. By the time the Pandit genocide took place, Pakistan already had the terror ecosystem in place. And America had paid for it, trained for it. And this is what is called a proxy war. Well, this is important to understand. A proxy war is when one country, in this case the United States, doesn't fight directly, but uses another country, like Pakistan, to fight its ideological battles. The US funded Pakistan to fight the Soviets, but once the war ended, Pakistan redirected the same assets towards India, and America looked away. This wasn't collateral damage. This was strategic blindness. Just 3 years after the Exodus, Mumbai was hit with 13 coordinated bomb blasts. 257 people were killed. This operation was planned by Daud Ibrahim and Tiger Memon, with support of Pakistan's ISI. Again, no response from the US, no sanctions, no global outrage. India was bleeding, and Washington was silent. In December 1999, Indian airline flight IC-814 was hijacked and taken to Kandahar, Afghanistan. India was forced to release 3 terrorists in exchange for the passengers. One of them was Masood Azhar, the man who would go on to found Jaish-e-Mohammed, the same group that would attack India again and again. Masood Azhar, released under pressure, escorted safely by the Taliban, welcomed in Pakistan like a hero, and allowed to openly set up a terror organization under ISI protection. What did the US do? Nothing. They knew who he was. They knew what he planned. They let it slide because Pakistan was still an ally. That same year, Pakistan's army launched a full military incursion into Indian territory, the Kargil War. This wasn't just infiltration. It was a planned war. Soldiers dressed as terrorists, occupying high ground positions in India. Hundreds of Indian soldiers died to reclaim our land. And how did the US respond? President Clinton refused to condemn Pakistan outright, even though the invasion was obvious, even though it was clear that Pakistani military was behind it. Clinton praised India's restraint and then went to Pakistan and gave them a both-side lecture. There was no sanctions, no cutoff, no punishment. Instead, Pakistan continued to receive US military aid. The same pattern again and again. So let's be honest, this was betrayal. You can't claim to be neutral when you are arming the side that starts war, sponsors terrorism, and supports jihad. And 2 years later, terrorists from Jaish-e-Mohammed stormed the Indian parliament. The attackers had linked to Pakistan's ISI. And remember, Jaish was founded by a man who was released because of the Kandahar hijack. This was a direct attack on Indian democracy. And still, the United States did not designate Pakistan as a state sponsor of terrorism. They condemned the attacks, issued press statements, and then went back to funding Pakistan's military. India wanted the world to act, and the US was busy preparing for a new war in Afghanistan, using Pakistan as a partner, yet again. From 1990 to 2008, here's a simple pattern. Terrorist attacks happen in India. They are linked to groups trained and funded by Pakistan. Pakistan receives no punishment from the US. Instead, they get more military aid, more weapons, and more diplomatic cover. This is not just complicity, it's collaboration by silence. The US funded Pakistan's military, Pakistan used the money to run proxy war against India, and the world's biggest democracy, India, was left to fight it. In 2001, right after the 9/11 attacks, George W. Bush stood before the world and declared, every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either they are with us or they are with the terrorists. Strong words, right? But that's all they were. Words. Because within weeks, the US chose Pakistan as its main ally in the war on terror. Yes, the same Pakistan that sheltered the Taliban, the same Pakistan whose military had created the Haqqani network, the same Pakistan whose intelligence agency, the ISI, was still openly funding terror groups targeting India. And what did the US do? It rewarded them. From 2001 to 2010 alone, the United States gave Pakistan over 20 billion in military and economic aid. Now ask yourself, where did that money go? It didn't go into fighting terror. It went into propping up the same military ISI complex that had already waged war against India in Kargil, hijacked Indian planes, and trained killers like Masood Azhar. In fact, while US drones were bombing Taliban caves in Waziristan, Pakistan was busy training fresh jihadis to send across the border into Kashmir. There were two wars happening at the same time. The US's war on terror in Afghanistan and Pakistan's proxy war against India, funded with American tax dollars. And Washington, they knew it. Intelligence reports, cables, even think tanks warned of Pakistan's double game. But it didn't matter, because India's suffering was not part of America's war. One rule for the West, another for India. That's not partnership. November 26, 2008, Mumbai. 10 Pakistani terrorists enter India by sea, armed with AK-47s, grenades, and GPS coordinates, which unleashed 72 hours of chaos. Hotels, cafes, railway station, civilians, police officers, even foreign nationals slaughtered. India is under siege. But here's the part that still doesn't get talked about enough. The man who helped plan this massacre wasn't from Pakistan. He was from America. David Headley, born in Washington, D.C., raised in Philadelphia, a U.S. citizen, former informant of Drug Enforcement Administration of the United States. He made multiple trips to India before the attack, conducted full video surveillance of the Taj Hotel, Shabad House, and CST station, mapped the targets, recorded entry points, delivered floor plans to Lashkar-e-Toiba. He was not a foot soldier. He was the planner, the insider, the American who orchestrated the attack. And now comes the most damning part. The United States was warned before the attack, multiple times. In 2005, Headley's Moroccan wife walked into the US embassy and told federal agents that he was training with Lashkar-e-Taiba. He hated India and he was planning something big in India. The FBI documented it, but they did nothing. In 2008, just weeks before the attack, Indian intelligence shared a dossier with US agencies. It warned of Pakistani American working with Lashkar, planning an attack in Mumbai. The US ignored it. David Headley had been a DEA informant for years. He was useful to American intelligence. So even when red flags were raised by his wife, by India, by other agencies, they shielded him. Why? Because he was valuable, because he had worked with the system, because they didn't want to burn an asset. And as a result, he got a free pass. Flew in and out of India, took pictures, shot videos, passed them to Pakistan, and almost 170 people died. And let's be brutally honest here. The US knew who Headley was. They were warned multiple times, and they chose to do nothing. Even after the attack, they refused to extradite him to India. They gave him a cushy plea deal and kept the full story buried. No global outage, no accountability, just silence. So the next time someone says that America stands with India against terror, ask them, then why did they protect the man who helped murder Indians? And why do they still call Pakistan an ally? The United States has spent over 2 decades telling the world that its fight is a war on terror. But every move that they have made proves otherwise. This war isn't about ending terrorism. It's about managing power and protect relationships that serve American interest, no matter the cost to others. Let's take Iran. The United States government calls Iran the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. They have sanctioned its economy, threatened military action, and regularly issue statements calling out Iran's support to like Hezbollah and Houthis. But when it comes to Pakistan, a country that has trained, sheltered, and launched terrorists who have carried out dozens of attacks in India, the tone suddenly changes. Pakistan has never been labeled a terrorist state by the United States, not after 26/11, not after Osama bin Laden being found in Abbottabad, a few hundred meters away from a military base, not after Hafiz Saeed gave open sermons in Lahore, not after Jaish-e-Mohammed publicly took credit of attacks on Indian security forces. Instead, Pakistan is considered as a major non-NATO ally. It still receives weapons. It still gets IMF support through US-led global institutions. And worse, it still gets political cover. Just a few weeks ago, Pakistan's Army Chief General Asim Munir visited Washington. He wasn't questioned about his military support on terror groups. He wasn't held accountable for Pahalgam or Kashmir or Taliban's safe haven. Instead, he was hosted with full diplomatic honor, met with senior Pentagon officials, and was praised as a stabilizing partner. This is the same man who oversees an army that continues to run a proxy war against India using the same tactics, the same group, the same language that has been used for over 30 years. But none of that matters because for America, Pakistan is still useful in Afghanistan and in China containment, in Islamic diplomacy. And India, despite being the world's largest democracy, a frontline victim of terrorism, and a growing economic powerhouse, India is constantly told to exercise restraint, even when it's defending itself, even when it's targeting known camps with surgical strikes like in Operation Sindoor. When Israel strikes back, it's right to self-defense. When India strikes back, it's risking escalation. That's not diplomacy, that's bias. Let's stop calling this war on terror. It's a war of convenience, with shifting definition, chosen enemies, and protected assets. And Pakistan has remained America's most protected terrorist exporter, not despite its action, but because of them. So now the picture is clear. From funding the ISI during the Afghan war, to ignoring Pakistan's terrorist export to India, to shielding David Headley, and still rolling out the red carpet for Pakistan general in Washington, America's hands aren't just dirty, they're soaked in the blood of Indian victims. This was never a war on terror. This is a war of interest, and India was never part of it. So maybe it's time that we stop mistaking diplomacy for loyalty. Maybe it's time we stop looking for validation from those who betray us for decades. And maybe it's time for Indians and India to ask the real question. Who is our real friend? Because one thing is clear. It's not and maybe never be Mr. Donald Trump. This is it from my side. This is Harry signing off. Jai Hind.